Always admired minimalist black and white landscape photography, you're in the right place. Chuck Kimmerle is a master of this genre, and today we're going to discuss this approach to landscape photography in detail. Hello and welcome to episode number 105 of the Photographing the West podcast. I'm your host, Kirby Flanagan, and I'm a wildlife and nature photographer. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not new, welcome back. It's a pleasure to welcome back fine art landscape photographer Chuck Kimmerle. Chuck, it's great to see you again.
You too, Kirby.
So we want to talk about your minimalist approach to photography. Where did that come from? Any influences, Ansel Adams or anybody?
I think we were all influenced by Ansel Adams, but I think our work differs a lot. I think it comes from really kind of two areas. One is my former job as a photojournalist, which I did for almost 20 years. The pictures we ran in the paper went anywhere from maybe 2 inches up to 6 inches, and maybe if you're really lucky, you get 8. And it's a very coarse dot screen. So if you wanted photos that had impact, that could really reach the reader and were quick and easy look, you had to be very simple in your compositions, in your content. You couldn't make often. You couldn't really make very busy photographs that looked really good. And also, once I started doing landscape, I was working in North Dakota. And North Dakota is probably the simplest landscape in the country, especially eastern North Dakota. It is almost literally as flat as the table I'm resting on right now. We used to joke, if you had a long enough lens, you could just stand in one spot and do all your photographs for the whole day just in that spot by turning circles. Because you can literally see for miles on a dead flat. Not anything unusual in the mountains, but it is pretty unusual in a normal landscape. So it was really difficult to do compositions that were, sort of busy. They had to be simple because the landscape was simple. And I think that may have been one of my biggest influences.
Yeah, that would make sense, having been to North Dakota and mostly the West, because that interests me more. But yeah, I know what you mean. So in most of your photos, you pare your landscapes down to 2 or 3 essential elements. How do you make this work compositionally?
I actually find it easier to do fewer elements in a photograph than say including a lot of things. It does make it compositionally a little more challenging, but I don't think it's any harder than say a mountain panorama. You'll see that compositionally I do center a lot of things, maybe even the bulk, maybe even a little too much, but because I'm really paring down what I have to offer in the photographs, it seems both arbitrary and forced if I were to actually move a subject onto the intersection of the so-called rule of thirds. I've tried that, and a lot of times it just seems phony. So I do center things a lot. Also, it allows the viewer to look at my photographs, the scene, the same way that I did, which is just dead on. We rarely, when we're talking to people, move their heads over to the rule of thirds, or when we're looking at a building, move it off to our peripheral vision. We tend to look directly at things, and that's the way I present the photographs. And it seems the most natural to me. So compositionally, I don't find it difficult. What I do find the most challenging is the juxtaposition of the various elements in the photograph, because when you're dealing with very few really important objects in your photograph, they have to be placed just in a perfect position relative to each other, both in size and space, to really ensure a good balance in the composition, which is important too when you're dealing with very few objects.
Sure, that makes sense. So black and white is a natural approach to your style, I guess, but it must make composition even more difficult for you. Talk about that.
I've never really been a color photographer, even though for the first 20, almost 30 years of my career working for other people as staff photographers, I had to shoot color for everything. So black and white was a natural offshoot to keep photography, my personal photography, separate from my work photography. So it's very natural to me now. And I've always sort of had more of an affinity to black and white. And compositionally, I think it actually opens up possibilities over color, in that I can photograph in maybe even suboptimal light, although I don't think there is such a thing, but in light that maybe color photographers wouldn't be caught dead in. I'm not restricted to subject matter or light that is colorful or saturated. I can work pretty much, any time of the day, as long as the light is appropriate. And it also opens up possibilities working in black and white to compare and contrast different objects with each other, both tonally and in size, and not having to worry about the color.
Okay. So looking at your photos in preparation, I got the sense that your Western landscapes in particular convey a sense of isolation and loneliness to me. I don't know if this is me or your intention. So is that intentional? And if so, why?
Not isolation and loneliness, more, I would say, sort of austere, reticence, quiet, peaceful. I mean, there is, I guess there is, when you're out in those areas, maybe a little bit of loneliness because you're alone. I mean, especially, when I was working in North Dakota, which, in North Dakota, we did consider ourselves west. But even further west in Wyoming, two of the least populated states in the country, you're alone. I mean, you're not going to run into a lot of people as long as you stay away from Yellowstone and Grand Tetons. And especially not going to run into a lot of photographers. But the reason I really appreciated both places where I lived, North Dakota and Wyoming, is that you could get away. You could be alone. So to me, it wasn't lonely as much as it was very comforting. And I think people, I think it depends on where they grew up and what their lifestyle is. And maybe seeing more of the wide open areas, really, the broader landscapes with small objects. It might be a little more uncomfortable for a lot of people to look at than people who actually live there. Because I've had people who live in North Dakota and Wyoming both say to me, they never really saw the land like that. They never really saw it as kind of peaceful and quiet and even, a little bit artistic. They've normally just kind of not even seen it. It's something that they're so used to. But if you were to take someone from New York City, where I live now, and put them in Wyoming or North Dakota, or even in front of some of my photographs, they're going to get a feeling of loneliness. They're going to get a feeling of that there's nothing there. They might not even be comfortable. But for me, both areas were kind of like home. You could sit out and actually take a deep breath. You could hear your heartbeat. just sort of get yourself centered. So I don't, also, if there is a sense of maybe loneliness or isolation, it's not intentional, but a lot of that might be because the scenes have been filtered through me. I've seen the scene, I've processed it, my head has processed it. And then from that processing, I've sort of made, what I consider to be, order and organization. And, maybe through the filter of Chuck, they maybe have a little more feeling of loneliness than they might through someone else.
Okay. Well, having spent a lot of time in Eastern Oregon and in Nevada now, I know what you mean. The landscapes here tend to be fairly simple, and to people who are new to the area, they don't see the beauty, I think, and it takes a while for that to kind of soak in. But there's certainly a beauty to the desert type landscapes and the Great Plains landscapes that is a thing of itself.
Well, it took me 10 years living in North Dakota before I finally really realized that it had photographic possibilities, and not just for pretty pictures, but for pictures that to me were really meaningful. And that said something about who I was as a photographer. So it's not like I came in and went, I'm going to start photographing this right away. The first thing I said when I got the job in North Dakota and drove out there was, holy crap, this is flat.
Yeah.
And probably the same exact reaction everybody has when they go out there the first time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I remember driving across Kansas the first time, and it was a similar experience, tabletop basically. So what software do you use to get the picture where you want it?
Mostly right now, everything starts in Lightroom. Well, everything right now starts in Lightroom. It didn't. I only started doing that about a year ago. But I try to do about 75 to 90% of the work in Lightroom because it's much more intuitive. It's simpler. You don't have to, do as many different types of tools for local. We're only limited to 3: radial, linear, and a brush. And it makes it very simple, more darkroom-like, kind of like, the old school way of doing it. But everything gets opened up into Photoshop and tweaked. There are some things Lightroom cannot do. There are times when I'm working my pictures that I cannot get a pure white anymore. Maybe I've put exposure down too low or contrast down too low, but I can't get a white no matter what I do. So I'll open it up into Photoshop and fix that. And Photoshop's got much better tools for doing corrections, like taking out dust or the errant branches that come in from somewhere, or my finger when I'm trying to block sun from hitting the lens. But not as much Photoshop as it used to be.
Okay. Do you use stuff like Silver FX Pro or any of that?
I used to, and not to have anything against it, but once, I think Google bought them and I was still using it. And then after Google sold it and I had to get a new license, I just didn't use it enough to really justify it. I have nothing against it except for their, what is that slider? Not structured, but it's similar. Lots of like really small mid-tone contrast. And aside from that filter, which people love to move all the way up to like 80 or 90, I really liked it. I liked a lot of their options, but it just isn't anything that really fits my workflow anymore. I'm trying to simplify everything. the less software, the better.
Yeah, I can agree with that. So you use a very limited tonal range in your landscapes. So what is that meant to convey?
I don't think it's not meant to really convey anything. It's just another way to simplify. I've got, for most of my photographs, very few objects in them. And if I were to run a full range of grays, say, like Ansel Adams does, from black to white with that bell curve, so most of it are grays, the pictures would feel heavier, they would feel busier. And by limiting my tonal range to really mostly like, I don't know, the brightest third and the darkest third, I'm able to separate out the tones enough that the printing of the photograph, the way it's presented, is actually as simplified as the composition.
Makes sense. Well, let's take a look at some of your photos and talk about them. So I like this one a lot, and can't tell you exactly why, but tell me about it. What was in your mind?
Well, this comes with a little bit of a story, which I have told myself I have to tell everybody who asks. This was early January, first or second week of January, I believe. Grand Tetons, I'm staying at Jackson Hall, because at the Motel 6, because it's really the only place I could afford. And I was up, it was a full moon. I was up about 4:30 in the morning, started off doing pictures. And as the sun started coming up, I realized the moon is setting in this notch somewhere over the Tetons. So I got in a parking lot and I thought, okay, this is pretty cool. Well, the next thing I know, it's me and like 8 other cars. And this is middle of winter, not long after the solstice. So, it's dark 30, and all these people showed up, which really, really surprised me. And it's like 10 or 15 below zero. Then I realized that with the moon setting in that notch, that there must have been a guidebook that told people this is a day to be there. And I said, nope, not going to happen. So I packed my stuff up, put it in a car. This guy next to me with 2 tripods and 2 cameras says, "You're missing the best part." And I wished him luck and drove on. And 2 miles, maybe 3 miles down the road is where I came across this scene. And what really struck me about it was how the shape of the Tetons in the background were mimicked almost exactly by the shape of the little pine grove or evergreen grove in the foreground. And it's one of those things where you can't stop the car fast enough. I jumped out and started running through the snow before I realized it was like waist deep. So I went and put on my snowshoes real quick and popped out there, and because I wanted to get myself up a little higher. And I was just really enamored with the scene. I thought that it was a gift from the photo gods because I had left the parking lot.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about. I didn't get that at first, but when you mentioned that, yeah, should have been pretty obvious. So is that the Snake River in the foreground?
No, that's it's back there somewhere, but
Right.
That's all ice fog.
Okay.
That's why the mountains are so hazy, is because it was so cold that the ice fog just obliterated any view from distance.
Okay. Yeah, I looked at it and thought it had to be the Tetons. There's not anything that looks quite like that, anyway, at least in my experience. One of my favorite areas.
They're intimidating.
Yeah, among other things. So obviously leading lines and again, it's the fence line kind of mimics the mountains, I guess, to me. Is that what you're seeing here?
Yeah, I never honestly think in terms of leading lines. To me, I either feel a composition or I don't. Excuse me. So, in retrospect, I do see the leading lines and sort of the zigzag shape, but that's not what I saw when I photographed it. To me, this is during a ground blizzard, so it's about 30-mile-an-hour wind, and everything from about 8 inches down is really being whited out by this blowing snow, including the distant hills. But what got me when I photographed this was a juxtaposition between the very hard-edged, very formal shapes of the barbed wire and the fence posts against the much more lyrical and softer shapes of the mountains in the background. Now, when I was shooting, I did realize the fence was going back and I placed myself in the right spot. But when I shot it, it looked to me, actually, when I first saw the scene, it looked to me very much like a bit like a Japanese ink painting.
Oh, yeah.
Very simple, lots of dark blacks, but mostly white. And that's kind of the feeling I was going for, only maybe a little more formal with the man-made objects.
Good. Yeah, I can see that. Took me a while to figure out what I was seeing here, but go ahead and talk about it.
Well, I was driving in Canyonlands with another photographer, Brenda Tharp, and she was driving, and I saw this. I'm like, stop, 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 stop. And even after I pointed this out, she didn't see it. And nothing against her. It's just that I sometimes see things that are a little odd. And there's probably something wrong with me. It probably says far more about me than anybody else. But when I saw this, and this branch is actually at the top, it's a branch in front of a boulder. The branch is coming towards me. But when I first saw it, it looked like it was going straight down, and it looked like with this boulder that the boulder was cracked like an egg.
Right.
So when I was photographing it, I really realized that it's very surreal in a way. And when I came back and started processing the image, I decided to forego a sense of scale, a sense of proportion, or even like reality, and just create something that makes people wonder what it is. There's a thing about, if you're talking about minimalism in art as like a formal discussion, formal definition, it's really nothing more than sort of trying to take meaning out of, and realism basically, out of the photograph, and just present images and subjects for what they are. And I'm not trying to say anything with this. I didn't have any agenda in my mind. I was just fascinated by the way that this egg-shaped boulder was, sort of completely taken apart by this old, burned, dead hunk of a tree. I'm pretty much leaving it up to the viewer to figure out what they see or what they think.
Yeah, it's wonderful textures in the rock, and yeah, the contrast between the rock and the branches. I didn't know if the tree was growing out of the rock or what, but I guess that's part of the mystery, huh?
Well, just between you and me and your millions and millions of followers. No, that was it had fallen over, it burned. So the branches were mostly dark, and it had just kind of fallen over and was hanging over the, kind of hanging over the boulder. But also, there is this sense of life, or at least what used to be life, in what looks like a very, very alien boulder-like landscape.
Yeah. Yeah, somehow that crack in the rock adds a lot to it too. I'm not sure why, but it's a powerful composition the more I look at it.
Thank you.
So what was going on here?
Yellowstone, and I'm guessing it was like 5:30 in the morning, late summer, midsummer. I had just driven by and I saw the evergreen sort of silhouetted against the steam, and I saw a contrail that was fast approaching. And I think most people who are going to hear you, and I'm sure Kirby, you've experienced this, where you see things coming together and you've got like 8 seconds to get everything set up and get a picture. And your mind just goes blank as your hands do everything they need to do to get set up to get that picture. And all I remember is stopping the car, jumping outside, and then snapping the photo at the last second. This is the first frame. I got another frame where the plane had already moved a little bit to the right and kind of ruined it. But I just love that I didn't have to think about anything with this picture. I didn't even think about composition because I did not have time. I knew what I wanted. I knew how to frame it, but I didn't have time to dissect the composition to get what I wanted, to get perfection. There was no thinking involved. It was all just intuition. And, without the plane up there, it would not have worked. It would have been an interesting picture. But for me, for a picture to be really, really successful, you can't just have one cool thing, but you have to have a second cool thing, almost like dessert, something a little bit extra. Mm-hmm. And, just like the crack in the last picture we looked at, that's what this is. It's just that little bit extra that pushes this picture, I think, from being a photograph that's kind of nice, kind of cool, to one that I'm really, really proud of.
Yeah, I like that too. My first thought, I have to admit, was why'd you leave the contrail in? But now I see what you're talking about.
Well, it adds, it adds some things, because when you look at the contrail, the first thing you think of is that there's a plane up there and there's a people in that plane. And, while I'm down on the ground in this amazing landscape, there are people up in that plane who are probably asleep that time of the morning and totally oblivious to this amazing beauty that they're flying over. Yeah, and I don't know if that's significant in any way, but that is what I was thinking about as I drove away, that somewhere up there are 350 poor bastards who didn't get a chance to witness what I just saw.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So is this on the East Coast or on the West Coast?
East Coast.
Okay.
This is actually not far from where I'm living now in Staten Island. It was a tropical storm coming in. And I had never been in a tropical storm. I mean, I'm from the Midwest. We don't have tropical storms. We have blizzards. So I went out walking on the beach and came across this horseshoe crab, which I don't think I'd even seen till I moved here. I probably had seen them in zoos or in some aquarium somewhere, but I don't think ever in the wild. And I just think they're the most amazing thing. It's prehistoric. And this one is dead. It was flipped over. This amazing detail in there. I'm sure the birds went nuts with it. But again, I really wanted not just to show the horseshoe crab, but to show it in its relation to the environment, which is why I included the pilings in the background, kind of juxtaposing even though it's sharp, the sort of soft, more lyrical and orderly designs of nature, against these very orderly, organized, stoic in a way, pilings that are created by man. I think these kind of juxtapositions are kind of powerful because you're sort of, taking nature on one hand, man on the other, and you're sort of comparing, what they create against each other.
Yeah. As you talk about it, I can appreciate it more and more. Well, let's move to some that are a little more abstract, I guess you'd say.
Pretty more minimalistic. For this one, this was shot not long after I moved to the East Coast and from Wyoming, and before that, North Dakota. So I was very much used to being able to drive 10 minutes and be in the middle of nowhere. And here, 10 minutes gets me like a mile and a half. It's New York City.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get away from people. So I spent a lot of time, I still do, kind of looking over the bay, the ocean, just sort of relishing that field of sort of the wide openness, the feeling of wide openness that I really wasn't getting anymore since we moved. And as this storm was going through, I noticed this bright spot in the clouds was sort of swinging in front of me. So I composed and I waited and waited until it was in position. Did, I think, probably a 30 or 60 second, probably a 30-second exposure. And really what I was hoping to convey, and I think it works in this case, is both kind of a feeling of nothingness and sort of everything all wrapped up into one. Because as you look over this, you don't see anything. It's seemingly very empty, but it's also so full of possibility. Because from where I'm standing, from where I'm looking, you can literally reach most of the world in a rowboat if you wanted to. And I thought it was a really powerful thought to me, because I'd really never thought of the water that way. To me, growing up in Minnesota, water was always, a couple square mile lake that you could canoe around if you wanted to. And out here, on the coast with the ocean, I mean, the ocean is everything.
Yeah.
And I really like that feeling of whatever you want to see in there. It's sort of like a fuzzy Rorschach test. You can see anything you want to in this.
Well, I grew up in the Midwest too, and we went to northern Minnesota on a trip, and first time I saw Lake Superior coming over the hilltop that went on forever. I had a somewhat similar feeling, I guess.
Yeah, it's strange when you first see it. I mean, I've seen the ocean before, don't get me wrong, but it's different when you live near it.
So this next one's completely different.
Completely. I was walking the dog one day, and we live close to this 2-mile-long bridge called the Verrazano, and they're doing a ton of maintenance on it, repainting the whole thing. I mean, it's a 2-mile-long bridge. I mean, you're not going to do it with a brush. So they've got lots of equipment, and I'm really not sure what these were for, what they were hanging down for. But when I saw them, to me, they looked like musical notes.
Oh.
And the poor dog got pulled back. He didn't want to come back, but I had to run out and get my camera. And I just love the simplicity and the way that you know, these could be notes. They could really be anything you want them to be. But mostly I just wanted to convey that they exist. I like the way that they were organized. I like the way that they're not all straight, that there is an exception in there where they're kind of curved over and tied in some weird little knot. But it just gave me a nice sense of calm when I looked at this, if that makes sense.
Yeah. One of them even looks like petals of a flower. Look, no, so
Yeah, the lower right one. Yep.
yeah. This one, I have to say, I didn't get at all at first glance.
That's okay. I think, excuse me, I think too many photographers are way too worried about creating work that everybody gets. And I think if everybody gets your work, you're doing it wrong. I was kind of tooling around in Wyoming, and this is after the 4th. And there is garbage at some of these campsites everywhere. It's actually really, really sad and a little bit depressing. But I sort of wanted in this one what I felt when I this is a spent bottle rocket. And when I saw it laying there, I thought, well, this is sort of like the hangover after the celebration where you drink just a lot too much. And I mean, visually, I like what I'm looking at here. I like the two-dimensionality of it. I like the way it's exposed, it's opened up. It's not really hiding anything. When you see an unexploded bottle rocket, it's just a round tube with a fuse. But once it explodes, it opens up sort of like a weird flower. So I like the fact that it seems very, almost vulnerable right now, and that its usefulness is served an end, and basically it's discarded. But I think it still has some visual merit, which is why I photographed it. And I realize that this stuff, some of the other pictures I do aren't going to resonate with everybody, and that's cool. I'm actually happy that you don't quite get it, because that's, I think, the way it should be.
Yeah, it's one of those, the more you look at it, the more you see, and begin to appreciate the textures and the contrast and the geometric shapes in it as well.
And I think that's one of the real strengths to being more minimalistic in an image, is that they are deceptively simple. And if you take the time to look, there is so much more than you see at first glance. A lot of times you'll see at an exhibit, people will stand in front of a picture for 5 seconds, and they move 5 seconds, they move 5 seconds. And nobody really studies work anymore. But if you were to stand in front instead of 5 seconds, stand in front of a photograph for 30 seconds. Force yourself, maybe even a minute. Force yourself to sit there and just look at it. You will see so much, and it opens up a whole new world, especially images that are very, very simple, that you may think there isn't a lot to look at.
Yeah, that was certainly my first impression, but like you say, the more you look at it, the more you see.
And I have a friend who says that's one of his favorite photographs of mine.
Yeah, I can see.
You never know.
Yeah, I can see why now that I've studied it more. Well, let's look at one more here.
Yeah, I like this one. Everybody asks me what it is, and it's so simple. It is dead grapevines, mostly probably invasive grapevines. And I am looking straight up, standing in the middle of a road in New York City, looking straight up at these. And if you've ever photographed straight up in a tripod that's less tall than you, you know how awkward that can be.
Yep.
I'm hunched over, my head is cocked up, and I'm squinting and I can't focus. And then like every, 13 seconds a car comes by. So I'll have to get out of the way because it's New York. And a photographer looking straight up is, I think, legally fair game in New York. So you got to be careful. But I really liked the way that these dead branches, the way they're splayed out, looks or sort of resembles in a way electricity, like a fuzziness. It's hard for me to describe when I first saw it, but I just felt like a lot of energy, even though it's kind of a quiet scene, but there's a lot of energy to it, as if you photograph, say, someone grinding steel with a million sparks, and you shot at a very fast shutter speed, and you stop this moment in time with this amazing amount of kinetic energy, and you just froze it. And that's sort of the way I was looking at this.
Okay, I can see that. Didn't occur to me that it was a grapevine, but I guess that's part of the point.
Feel free to disagree with me.
No, I didn't ask you what gear you used to shoot. I gather mostly digital at this point.
Oh yeah, I started off 4x5, but no, then once cameras got to be around 6 megapixels, and I remember back then they're like 6 megapixels. Lenses can't resolve more than that, so cameras will never have to be more than 6 megapixels. And now look where we are. But when it got to that point, I said, you know what? I'm kind of digging this. I'm kind of, I grew up in a house. My dad got his computer degree, or got a degree in mathematics, because that's what you needed back in the 60s to be a computer programmer. So I've been around computers my entire life. I was a proud Commodore 64 owner in 1983. And computers have always been very natural to me. So, when digital came, I really gravitated towards it. So right now I'm using, everything is used. Everything I own is used. I don't have anything new anymore. Well, I don't have anything new. I bought everything used. So I have a Nikon D800 and a D810. And I used to have 7 lenses I carried around with me every day. But that made for 2 bodies and 7 lenses. That was a lot. And I've now simplified to 3 lenses. I still use 2 cameras because I run into far less dust problems, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Especially when I was working in Wyoming. The high plains, it's very dry. lots of dust, not quite as bad as Death Valley, but a lot worse than most other places. And dust was a constant problem until I went with 2 bodies and a tripod, everything on a tripod.
Okay. Well, thanks for the education. I've certainly learned a lot. I hope everybody watching and listening has as well. It's always a great pleasure to get together with you.
You too, Kirby. Thank you.
So each episode of Photographing the West is published on the 15th and 30th of each month. The audio-only version can be found on iTunes and many other RSS feeds. The video version can be found on YouTube as Flanagan Photos. Both versions are on my website at www.flanaganphotos, spelled FLANAGANPHOTOS.com. We'll be back on April 30th with another episode with an interesting photographer doing interesting things. So bye for now.